everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS. And today I'm going to be talking about the 1995 film Seven, starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman as two detectives who are assigned to investigate a series of murders all centred around the seven deadly sins. Now, this film was written by Kevin Andrew Walker and directed by David Fincher, who was fresh off the heels of Alien 3. And if you know any of the history behind Alien 3, you will realise that it was pretty much a bad experience for David Fincher, to the point where he literally found himself so repulsed by the idea of working on another studio film that it literally, swore him off directing films altogether. It almost did, but then, of course, the script for Seven dropped on his lap and he essentially said, I want to direct this film because it seems like such an interesting subject matter. And of course, one of the things that drew him to the project was the ending, which I'll get deeper into when we get deeper into the story. But what I really like about this film is, even though it's quite a grim piece of cinema on the surface is key here, because it is depressing, it is really dark, and it is really sinister. But what I really love about this film is it really does shine a light on the darker side of humanity, that people can, effectively be changed and shifted by their environment. Because if you really think about it, the place where this film is set in the Ultimate Sin City. It could almost be set in Gotham from the Batman comics almost. It feels like it's the most depraved place in the world, where there's a lot of darkness, it always rains. And there's even a line that Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman, says to Brad Pitt's character, Mills, out of all the places to get transferred to, why here? And he just says, well, it's just a place to work. I've been busting my balls all my life to get to a position like this. And Somerset just basically says, okay, that's your funeral then, I guess. But what I really like about this film is it's essentially a buddy cop film with a little bit more grit. It's got the stereotypical buddy cop formula format. It's basically Lethal Weapon, but the jokes are very limited, and there's a lot less, I'm getting too old for this shit, and more like, oh, I want to get out of this profession as quickly as possible. That's what Morgan Freeman's character basically is. He's seen the worst of humanity. He's been there, done that, and bought a t-shirt to go along with it. So he wants to retire. He wants to retire away from his profession and go do something else. But now he feels like he's been lassoed into investigating this horrible series of murders all centered around the seven deadly sins. And it's really quite, it's really quite horrifying. And you really do feel like Morgan Freeman a lot of the time when you're watching this film, where you feel like, what are they really defending themselves? What are they really defending here when they're going into the city and investigating these murders, investigating these crimes? Like, there's this really wonderful scene at the very start of the film where Somerset is called to investigate the shooting of a man in his apartment, and one of his colleagues says, we're so excited to see you leave, after Somerset basically says, well, did the kids see who shot him? And his partner goes, well, we're going to be very happy to see you leave. Who cares who shot, if the kids saw him shoot someone or see the man get shot, because it doesn't matter, because he's dead. We're here investigating it. Who gives a damn? And I thought to myself, well, for one thing, he's a witness, and secondly, that's a child who's experiencing something horrible and he needs counselling. So you really do get the tone of the entire film right there. This place is an absolute cesspit, in the sense that there is no light, there is no happiness, there is no joy in this place. It just feels like it feels like after you've seen this place, you feel like you want to take a long shower afterwards. Like, it feels like you feel dirty just looking at it, and it's a really horrible place to be. But what I really like about this film is it actually feels like it's saying something. It's saying something about us. It's saying something about the nature of, we have the responsibility to basically create the worlds that we inhabit, essentially. It's like that line from Paradise Lost where I think John Milton says, we all have it in ourselves to make a heaven or hell of our own happiness. And that's something that, or heaven and hell of our own existence. And I really do like that, because that's essentially what happens to the characters in this film. They're essentially creating their own heaven and hell based on their own philosophy on life and their own philosophy on good and evil, based on how they look at the world and how they view the act of investigating crimes. Mills has a very cynical worldview about... Mills is a very interesting character because he's essentially a very kind of rookie cop. He likes to go in head first to everything. Whenever there's a shooting that happens, he likes to be in hot pursuit of his, attacker. When it comes to, Somerset, he's more cool and calm. And he's the one who, is investigating the crimes. Like the first murder in this film is absolutely horrific. You don't see the crimes in this film, by the way. You just see the aftermath, and you see these horrible details. Like, say, for example, in the first death, you see this man who is massive. He is an absolutely huge man, and he's huge. He's been overfed, and he's just sort of leaning over this table, and he has his head down into a bowl of pasta sauce, and there's all these horrible creatures, scurrying around. It literally is a health inspector's worst nightmare. It is absolutely horrendous. It's a germaphobe's worst nightmare. Honestly, if you have a issue with germs or anything like that, it probably turns your stomach and it makes you dizzy. But to me, it's just it's horrible anyway. But it's really horrible to find out how he died. He was overfed to the point of bursting, and he had bits of barbed wire laced around his ankles and his hands, and he had bits of metal fridge magnet or metal tiling fed to him. So he literally was being overfed until he burst. And it's a really horrific description, and it really just tells you how much patience this killer had in trying to fulfill this horrific design of these murders. There's so many horrible murders in this film, but I just think they're all really interesting because you never do see them. You never do see them taking place, but you are absolutely chilled to the core with how these murders are demonstrated, with how they're executed. It's a fabulous film from an art direction standpoint. It's a fabulous film from a script writing standpoint, because what I really like about the characters, the two main characters of Mills and Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt respectively. Mills is a very gung-ho type of detective who likes to go in head first whenever there's a shooting that happens. He likes to run after his suspect, whereas Mills is more calculated and more calm. He's the one who's, investigating the scene with with like a well manicured comb, with a fine-toothed comb over every detail, whereas with Mills, he's very much all about saying, oh, what the hell does this mean, what the hell does that mean, and that's effectively what's going on. He doesn't really like to have patience. There's this really wonderful scene where Somerset is looking over these books, the Canterbury Tales, Dante's Inferno, all these great classical pieces of literature that all relate to Christianity and Catholicism, and he hands them over to Mills, and he's reading these books, and he immediately gets fed up and throws the book at the steering wheel. And then, just to kind of, it shows how clever Somerset is. He actually gives Mills the Cliff Notes version of the books as well. So it's almost like academia for dummies, effectively, or academic writings for dummies, how to understand academic writing for dummies. And it's so hilarious because it's almost like Somerset knows Mills, and he knows his character and how impatient he's going to get. But he is very quick to anger, Mills is, but he actually has a very stable home life. He's an animal lover. He has a group of 3 dogs in his apartment, and he's married to a woman who's played by Gwyneth Paltrow. And what happens to her in this film is absolutely awful, and the fact that there is an ending which absolutely chef's kiss. It is depressing, it is awful, it is quite sickening, and it makes you feel ill, but at the same time I found myself going, brilliant, well done, David Fincher and Kevin Andrew Walker. You both did an incredible job with this screenplay, with this ending, and it really is a fantastic way of tying everything together. And it really does feel like everything, like I said, everything that David Fincher wanted to do in Alien 3, he gets to do in 7. Like the scene where the killer Mills confronts the killer. He gives chase after they find his apartment. He essentially chases him into this alleyway on this stormy day, and when he gets attacked by the killer points his gun at his forehead, at his temple, and Mills can't do anything. He's paralysed, he's got a broken arm, and he can't really do anything. That is a mirror image of the scene where the xenomorph corners Ripley, except in the case of Seven, it makes more sense because it actually ties into what the killer is wanting to do with Mills. And it's very interesting, and it's a really well written piece of work, and it really does feel like Kevin Andrew Walker really thought of everything, and he really knew how to bring this all together. And what I really love about this film is, even though it is quite a dark and depressing film, there is a wonderful philosophy at the end of it, which is that Somerset, at the very end of the film, quotes Hemingway. He says, Hemingway once wrote that the world is a fine place and worth fighting for. I agree with the second part, which means he knows the world's crap. He knows that there are piece of shit people who inhabit it, but the shit's still worth fighting for, if that makes sense. And I really do love that philosophy, and I love that, it doesn't try to pretend to be anything it isn't. It just basically is telling you right up front to your face that this is terrible. But what I really love about this film is what the killer actually intends to do when he, has his entire design finished. He basically views his victims as less than him, effectively. That's why he does the things that he does. He takes great joy. He feels like he's chosen this guy who they call John Doe because he doesn't really have any identity. He wants to, in effect, preach. But in many cases, he likes to depict himself as a martyr, someone who was chosen to do this by God. Almost like a twisted version of Bill Paxton's character in Frailty. But in the case of John Doe, he takes too much joy in killing his victims, whereas with Bill Paxton in Frailty, he knows that this is just his design. He even says to one of his kills, "May God keep you and bless you." So completely different in regards to how they deal with their chosen one status, but John Doe is just pure evil. He's also very judgmental in the sense that he literally calls a prostitute a disease-spreading whore, and he calls a beast man a disgusting man who, if you met him on the street, you'd join your friends in delightfully mocking him, and if you saw him eating, you wouldn't be able to finish your meal. And it's such a horrific, horrible disdain of humanity in many ways. He isn't a religious person. He is a horrible, horrible person. But in a way, he also is kind of telling the truth in the sense that the world that they live in is an absolute cesspit. It's a shithole, excuse my language, but it is a terrible place to be. So it would give birth to all these horrible people who probably in his eyes deserve it. But it's all because they have things like they're overweight, or that they care too much about their outer beauty as opposed to their inner beauty, or they go round and, have sex with anything that moves just to make a living. All those sorts of things are all kind of things that he feels is worth killing people over. And that's quite sick and twisted. And it's very well written. And I really do like the fact that you do kind of find yourself really kind of, seeing things from John Doe's point of view, but then you also know very quickly that he is a judgmental arsehole and he doesn't care about the world. And he knows that he's a terrible person. In fact, that's why he literally plans this whole entire scheme where he takes them out into the middle of nowhere and essentially, does the terrible things that he does. But what I really think is incredible is that this film just really is a great example of a good screenplay and how you can really just build on these things. And I just think it's a fabulous film. It's one of my favourite David Fincher films. I love films like Fight Club. I love films like Zodiac. But I do think David Fincher is fabulous in this film, because he really does show that he can, really tell a good story and very gripping. I think with Alien 3, the biggest problem is that they didn't know what the screenplay should be, which is, I think, because I'm going off on a tangent a little bit with Alien 3, but I think the problem with Alien 3 was that it focused on trying to continue Ripley's story. Ripley's story ended in Aliens. So let's have the ending be, or let the third film be, Amanda Ripley going to go and find her mother. That's what Alien 3 should have been before Alien Isolation came along. But that was one of the things that I really did think would have been a marked improvement from what we got in Alien 3. And it would have made a little bit more sense, because then it would have added to the tragedy of her growing up without her mother in her life. And then, of course, it would add extra tragedy, but then also extra redemption to Ellen's character when she eventually finds Newt and they sleep all the way home, as it were. So that's just my little tangent. But that's been my review on Seven, and I hope you enjoy this video. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and I hope you're all doing very well. This has been Joshua with Interesting Musings. What did you think of this film, Seven? Let me know down in the comments. What was your favourite scene? What did you like about it? And if you didn't like it, please let me know in the comments as well what you thought of this film. That's all for today. I've been Joshua with Interesting Musings. Take care. Bye for now.